Greetings, welcome back to Black Bear News. And before I forget, let me remind you to tune in tomorrow, Thursday. I'm going to do live stream at 1 p.m. Going to read some articles, talk about various subjects, and remember to participate in the gas strike on Friday. On Friday, I'm going to be trying to cover Greta Thunberg in Los Angeles at City Hall. I'm hoping that there is an actual factual crowd there. I'm hoping that it's bananas, and I can bring it to y'all. I wanted to, in this video, cover a story that so many sent me. My dog is trying to eat all the packaging from my new lighting apparatus. It's very interesting to young children and dogs. Cardboard boxes and plastic wrap. Yeah, I got this article from every direction possible, and so I thought I should have to cover it. U.S. military could collapse within 20 years due to climate change. Report commissioned by the Pentagon says. Well, at least they were allowed to publish it, and the people who were doing the report weren't sent to jail or fired yet. The report says a combination of global starvation, war, disease, drought, and a fragile power grid could have cascading, devastating effects. According to a new U.S. Army report, Americans could face a horrifically grim future from climate change, involving blackouts, disease, thirst, starvation, and war. The study found that the U.S. military itself might also collapse. The U.S. military itself might also collapse. This could all happen over the next 2 decades, the report notes. That doesn't sound like a lot of time. The senior U.S. government officials who wrote the report are from several key agencies, including the Army, Defense Intelligence Agency, and NASA. So all the that's a pretty wide umbrella of agencies. The study called on the Pentagon to urgently prepare for the possibility that domestic power, water, and food systems might collapse due to the impacts of climate change as we near mid-century. So these aren't crazy conspiracy theorists. These aren't lunatic doomers on YouTube. These aren't wacky people on Twitter or on Reddit or on 8chan. This is the U.S. government. This is the Pentagon telling you all is not well. The report was commissioned by General Mark Milley, Trump's new chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, making him the highest-ranking military officer in the country. The report also puts him at odds with Trump, who does not take climate change seriously. And that's a comical way to put it. The report, titled Implications of Climate Change for the U.S. Army, was launched by the U.S. Army War College in partnership with NASA in May at the Wilson Center in Washington, D.C. The report was commissioned by General Milley during his previous role as the Army's Chief of Staff. It was made publicly available in August via the Center for Climate and Security, but didn't get a lot of attention at the time. The 2 most prominent scenarios in the report focus on the risk of a collapse of the power grid within the next 20 years and the danger of disease epidemics. Both could be triggered by climate change in the near term, it notes. Increased energy requirements triggered by new weather patterns like extended periods of heat, drought, and cold could eventually overwhelm an already fragile system. This is what everyone has been saying. This is, people who are in touch with the climate crisis and people who are, more and more the voices of, certain doom or certain disaster or impending catastrophe have gotten louder and louder. It's fanned out. It's not Guy McPherson anymore. It's fanned out to many, many people. But all, looking at the same body of evidence and coming to the same conclusion. Dar Jamel and Catherine Ingraham and Jem Bendell and Roger Hallam. And now you have the U.S. military or, the Pentagon or, the head of the Joint Chiefs of Staff understands that this is a big, big problem. And proposing that this could happen in the next 20 years. That's not as dire as maybe in the next 5 or 10 years, but 20 years is pretty close. It's not end of the century. It's not even mid-century. And do we even make it to the end of that 20 years? It says within 20 years. So that's anytime between now and 20 years. The report also warns that the U.S. military should prepare for new foreign interventions in Syria-style conflicts triggered due to climate-related impacts. Bangladesh, in particular, is highlighted as the most vulnerable country to climate collapse in the world. The permanent displacement of a large portion of the population of Bangladesh would be a regional catastrophe with the potential to increase global instability. The report warns this is a potential result of climate change complications in just one country. Globally, over 600 million people live at sea level. Sea level rise, which could go higher than 2 meters by 2100, according to one recent study, will displace tens, if not hundreds of millions of people, creating massive, enduring instability. The report adds. The U.S. should therefore be ready to act not only in Bangladesh, but in many other regions, like the rapidly melting Arctic, where the report recommends the U.S. military should take advantage of its hydrocarbon resources and new transit routes to repel Russian encroachment, because they are encroaching. But without urgent reforms, the report warns that the U.S. military itself could end up effectively collapsing as it tries to respond to climate collapse. It would lose capacity to contain threats in the U.S. and could wilt into mission failure abroad due to inadequate water supplies. That's wild. That doesn't sound good. That doesn't sound like a fun time at all for a lot of people. The report paints a frightening portrait of a country falling apart over the next 20 years due to the impacts of climate change on natural systems such as oceans, lakes, rivers, groundwater, reefs, and forests. Current infrastructure in the U.S., the report says, is woefully underprepared. Most of the critical infrastructures identified by the Department of Homeland Security are not built to withstand these altered conditions. Some 80% of U.S. agricultural exports and 78% of imports are waterborne. This means that episodes of flooding due to climate change could leave lasting damage to shipping infrastructure, posing a major threat to U.S. lives and communities, the U.S. economy, and global food security, the report notes. At particular risk is the U.S. national power grid, which could shut down due to the stressors of climate change. And what were we talking about the other day? As extreme weather events, fires, floods, hurricanes, storms, cold snaps, droughts, food shortages, as things start to unravel and go down, a lot of people are going to start pointing the fingers and start wondering who let this happen? Who was in charge? The power grid that serves the United States is aging and continues to operate without a coordinated and significant infrastructure investment. Vulnerabilities exist to electricity generating power plants, electric transmission infrastructure and distribution system components, it states. As a result, the increased energy requirements triggered by new weather patterns like extended periods of heat, drought, and cold could eventually overwhelm an already fragile system. Well, what are we already seeing, right? We're seeing extended heat waves or extended cold snaps, and people lose heat, lose power. The grid is already unable to keep up with the demand as it stands right now in a severe situation, which is going to get more severe. The report's grim prediction has already started playing out. Man, if this doesn't sound, this Pentagon report sounds like a post on the Arctic News almost. The grim prediction has already started playing out, with utility PG&E cutting power to more than 1 million people across California to avoid power lines sparking another catastrophic wildfire. While climate change is intensifying the dry season and increasing fire risks, PG&E has come under fire for failing to fix the state's ailing power grid. The U.S. Army report shows that California's power outage could be a taste of things to come, laying out a truly dystopian scenario of what would happen if the national power grid was brought down by climate change. One particularly harrowing paragraph lists off the consequences bluntly. If the power grid infrastructure were to collapse, the United States would experience significant, bullet points, loss of perishable foods and medications, loss of water and wastewater distribution systems, loss of heating, air conditioning, and electrical lighting systems, loss of computer, telephone, and communications systems, including airline flights, satellite networks, and GPS services, loss of public transportation systems, loss of fuel distribution systems and fuel pipelines, loss of all electrical systems that do not have backup power. Although the report does not dwell on the implications, it acknowledges that a national power grid failure would lead to a perfect storm requiring emergency military responses that might eventually weaken the ability of the U.S. Army to continue functioning at all. Isn't this a great time to bring our troops home? Isn't it a great time? This is a great time to requisition the entire military budget or the entire capability of the U.S. military and turn it towards a national effort to retool our entire infrastructure to deal with climate change, to turn our entire military force or a large part of it into a national climate change / peace / regreening / a food distribution corp. This needs to happen. I mean, this is laying it out. This lays out the case for that happening right now, very, very soon, right? Are we going to wait 5 or 10 years for it to get worse? Because by then we're in danger of the U.S. military collapsing because the cascading situations leading to not being overwhelmed. The cascading effects of power loss would rapidly challenge the military's ability to continue operations. Why are we waiting? Why are we waiting for this to happen? This is a really great reason to just strip Trump of his power and get him out of office. Like, the Joint Chiefs of Staff, the Pentagon knows this is a problem, and Trump is just screwing everything up. He's just a bull in a china shop, and he's just destroying everything. This is a legitimate reason to just be like, nope, that's it. I don't know how you'd want to phrase that. I don't know if you want to, inability to participate in reality, to function, to carry out his duties in a reasonable manner. something. Wow, this goes on and on and on. A new era of endless war. The authors argue that the Syrian civil war could be a taste of future international conflicts triggered by climate-induced unrest. There is no question that the conflict erupted coincident with a major drought in the region, which forced rural people into Syrian cities as large numbers of Iraqi refugees arrived. So it wasn't just the Syrian conflict was exacerbated by the Iraqi conflict, and then we went into Syria just to help. We're just helping, guys. Syria, not Syria. The resulting conflict reignited civil war in Iraq and heightened military tensions between the U.S. and Russia. The most urgent case for a potential U.S. intervention, however, is the South Asian country of Bangladesh, with half of its 160 million strong population currently living at sea level. Some 80 million Bangladeshis are set to be displaced as huge areas of the country become uninhabitable due to climate impacts. How will this large-scale displacement affect global security in a region with nearly 40% of the world's population and several antagonistic nuclear powers? With a population 8 times that of Syria's, the report explains, permanent displacement of a large portion of the population of Bangladesh would be a regional catastrophe with the potential to increase global instability. There are also nuclear weapons in that area. Pakistan and India. You know, when people talk about the possibility of a regional nuclear war breaking out, India and Pakistan are often in the conversation. And India has been hit pretty hard by some climate events as well. Water scarcity will destabilize nations and the U.S. Army. By 2040, global demand for fresh water will exceed availability. 2040. And by 2030, people, this is 10 years from now, by 2030, 1/3 of the world population will inhabit the water-stressed regions. 1/3 of the world populations inhabit the water-stressed regions of North Africa, Southern Africa, the Middle East, China, and the United States. The United States are included in water-stressed regions, the report notes. 2030. Holy shit. Should we start taking this seriously or what? Rampaging for Arctic oil. This is wild. This is the last kind of section here, but this video has already gone on fairly long, and yet the report's biggest blind spot is its agnosticism on the necessity for a rapid whole society transition away from fossil fuels. Bizarrely, for a report styling itself around the promotion of environmental stewardship in the Army, the report identifies the Arctic as a critical strategic location for future U.S. military involvement to maximize fossil fuel consumption. Wow. Noting that the Arctic is believed to hold about 1/4 of the world's undiscovered hydrocarbon reserves, the authors estimate that some 20% of these reserves could be within U.S. territory, noting a greater potential for conflict over these resources, particularly with Russia. Oh boy. The melting of Arctic sea ice is depicted as a foregone conclusion over the next few decades, implying that major new economic opportunities will open up to exploit the region's oil and gas resources, as well as to establish new shipping routes. The U.S. military must immediately begin expanding its capability to operate in the Arctic to defend economic interests and to partner with allies across the region. Senior U.S. defense officials in Washington clearly anticipate a prolonged role for the U.S. military, both abroad and in the homeland, as climate change wreaks havoc on critical food, water, and power systems. Can somebody propose what I'm proposing? I mean, we're in a time of where far left ideas are being accepted as almost normal, even though they're being pushed out by the mainstream media as, you know, radical left, the radical left. But everybody is talking about, you know, it's, you know, now normalized to have Tulsi Gabbard on a debate stage talking about regime change war. But we really have to start politicians really have to start normalizing the climate change conversation. It's got to come up a lot more, and it's got to be way more radical than what we're talking about. I mean, we really need to be talking about using the military budget and using the military to have a wartime like situation. You know, all hands on deck. Everybody in this fight to turn this around or stop. You know, turn the Titanic around or stop the Titanic. All hands on deck. Rather than waiting for the U.S. military to step in after climate collapse, at which point the military itself could be at risk of collapsing, we would be better off dealing with the root cause of the issue skirted over by this report: America's chronic dependence on the oil and gas, driving the destabilization of the planet's ecosystems. Yeah, but that's not the root. I mean, that's at the root, but we need to, you know, we're talking about industrial civilization and keeping 8 billion people alive. Even if we get rid of oil and gas, we need to talk about, you know, consumerism and, you know, and a continued growth of population, and, you know, how much that is driving environmental destruction as well. So it's a much bigger problem than oil and gas. Anyways, this is a wild report. This is crazy. Really frightening indeed. This is from October 24th by Nafiz Ahmed from Vice. Thank you so much for your eyes, your ears, and your conscience. If you would like to support this channel, you can do so at the links below. Until next time, peace.